Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Francis and Jan, for that introduction. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians and to acknowledge the many thousands of years that they looked after the Jarrah forest in a state that white people first found at first settlement. And it's a tribute to their skills as land managers that the magnificent Jarrah forest, as we once knew it, existed for all those thousands of years. I also want to pay tribute to all of you, especially those of you that are part of the Jarrahdale Forest Protectors, the Conservation Council of WA, the Wilderness Society and the WA Forest Alliance for your concern over many, many years for the Northern Jarrah Forest and for the campaign that you are all embarking on now to not just prevent the expansion by Alcoa and other mining companies, but to see a phase out, but also a complete review of the renewal process that we are embarking on now for Alcoa's leases going forward. I'd like to start off with a personal perspective and to say that 4 decades ago, I just completed my undergraduate science degree from ANU in Canberra, and during that time embarked on being an environmental activist. And at that time it was working on rainforest issues all the way from the Franklin River up to the Daintree, and also trying to halt the early the start of the Roxby Down uranium mine. So coming back to that, returning to Western Australia in 1983, I joined again the campaign to save native forests, and Bill Hare invited me to do a critique of bauxite mine rehabilitation in the Northern Jarrah. And the reason for that is that the only reason we have mining on such a scale in our forest is that there's a perception of a social license. So of course there's the regulatory and legal framework that goes back to 1961, but in fact it's the perception that Alcoa has a social license to do the large-scale bauxite mining. We challenged it then, and we challenge it today. We don't accept that there's a social license for that, which is the permission by the community, the City of Perth, and indeed all the citizens of Western Australia to allow the destruction of such a magnificent ecosystem on the scale that it is. I wanted to say that back then, the campaigns run by the Campaign to Save Native Forests and the Australian Conservation Foundation, the Conservation Council, were very invigorating. In fact, they were the true opposition at that time. Certainly successive Labour and coalition governments have been captive to the interests of Alcoa in the mining sector, and it was up to the community sector, for example, to do the critiques, not just the environmental critiques, but the energy and the economic ones. And one of the achievements of that time that I remember was the stopping of an aluminium smelter. Can you imagine what that would have done both to our environment but also to our carbon budget, if we had an aluminium smelter established probably on Collie coal or on Northwest Shelf gas. Small groups and individuals like you and like us can make a huge difference. All we need to do is persevere, and I thank you for those of you that have spent the time you have for wanting to care for the forest we have. Just to talk about what can be achieved, I'll go for the first slide. Thank you.
Sure.
Back then in 1984, started about a 7-month study of bauxite mine rehabilitation, which eventuated in this report published in February 1985, and also involved a seminar that both Bill and I did to Alcoa at the Burragoon office, basically critiquing what we saw as the shortfalls that in any way bauxite mine rehabilitation could compensate for the loss of Jarrah forest. At that time, there was still extensive use of eastern state species, and those sites remain a real problem long into the future. In addition, the diversity of understory species was very considerably reduced. Thanks to pressure of groups like the ones represented here, but also many individuals, of course they've invested in much better techniques over the years, as well as their corporate sponsorship of Landcare. After the campaign, after that year of doing the report and being part of the campaign against the expansion, even then, of Alcoa's operations, my attention and a lot of our attention turned to the southern Jarrah forest and the Karri forest. And since that time of 1985, we've actually had 3 waves of successes. So there was initially the Shannon National Park and the associated national parks of the Valley of the Giants and Hawke Block and Jane Block and so on. Later on, under the Gallop government's decisions, there was the old growth forest decisions and a whole suite more of reservations, including the Walpole Wilderness Area, an area of 350,000 hectares. And then most recently, the announcement that native forest logging will cease in 2024 by the McGowan government. Now those 3 waves of successes involved lots of sacrifice by lots of individuals. So it is possible to take on both captive governments and industries to bring about significant change. The other whole area that I'd like to talk about to give hope for the campaign that we are embarked on now is to say that uranium mining has not been able to establish yet in Western Australia. So that's taken 40 years of hard work by both traditional owners and groups like the Conservation Council and anti-nuclear groups. And it's to a credit to all of us who've been part of the anti-nuclear movement that we've learned the lessons of the uranium mines in the Northern Territory in South Australia, and through a combination of civic pressure, promotion of renewable energy, and hard work to discredit the nuclear industry, we've still got a situation that despite approval of mines, there's no established uranium mine yet in Western Australia. And so it is possible to take on a whole sector of the mining industry. It just takes dedication and alliance building. The other thing I wanted to say is that part of my journey in the last 40 years is turning to Gondwana Link, which also covers the southern forest and a lot more. And that's an eco-restoration program on a grand scale, 1,000 kilometres of aiming to connect healthy and connected country across the southern part of our state. To date, probably in the order of 15,000 hectares of countries had restoration treatment, and it's over the last 20 years, it's a vision of not just holding what's precious to us, but working with a wide range of groups, including Noongar Ranger groups, on the eco-restoration program journey. So the real scale of Jarrah forest destruction is shown through satellite photography. And let's go through one of them, several of them. So this is the satellite imagery showing the impacts of bauxite and gold mining in the northern Jarrah forest adjoining Mandurah and Perth. So this is an urban centre of more than 2 million people in close proximity to this wonderful Jarrah forest that also happens to be some of our most important water catchments. And this is recent satellite photography showing the patchwork, the 30,000 hectares of mined country, including rehab, and then the more than 90,000 hectares of impacted country in the fragmented landscapes beyond it. This is the Warunga Nanga Brook area, and again showing the impacts of mining across the whole landscape. If we are looking at assessing whether rehabilitation can compensate for the loss of Jarrah forest and the values, we need to look far more than specific sites. We're looking at the overall health and sustainability of the ecosystem as a whole. Next slide, thank you. And this is Worsley Alumina's operations near Mount Saddleback at Boddington, again showing the complete fragmentation of the Jarrah forest, the scale of which is only really visible from the air and from satellite. Next slide. And in the 5 years, 2025 to 2030, another 17,500 hectares of your precious backyard is going to be mined. The northern Jarrah forest has been subject to numerous environmental impacts, both the consequence of logging for the last century, but also dieback, climate change, feral animals. Of course, we have a far less native fauna than we had prior to human settlement and the introduction of feral animals. Yeah, so although we've had this decision on ceasing of native forest logging, not of mining. And in fact, there's an expansion of mining applications in addition to Alcoa's plans for expansion. I think it's really only from the air that one gets a concept of the scale of what's happening on the Darling Scarp above us. So there's no doubt that thanks to the pressure of public community awareness that they've had to invest a significant amount in mine site rehabilitation. One of the concerns, though, over their corporate sponsorship programs is that we've had Alcoa has done has attempted to buy public goodwill and indeed through the universities by sponsoring a whole lot of research. So this program, which I've been aware of having been part of the Landcare movement, there's a number of significant problems with it. For example, in 1989, when Alcoa started its Landcare program, which was an offshoot of all their work on mine site rehabilitation, they started a 5-year program of $1 million a year. Now, for that very year of 1989, their profit was $721 million. So the scale of their investment, even though it's often mooted as being generous and a good corporate citizen, in fact is tiny compared to the overall profits they have been making and the cost to the public sector of managing the forests long after they have gone. So there's all those hidden costs as well, and of course damage to our water catchments. So it's something that I've been very critical of, is the way Alcoa has attempted to buy public goodwill, in other words the social license I was talking about, through simply funding community and land care efforts. What would be far better is to have funds from corporations go into an independent section from which would be the decisions made of what to invest in, and that would prevent this co-opting we've seen both of whole universities like Curtin University, but also of many aspects of the community sector. It's vital that we raise awareness in the community, and I'm extremely pleased to see that the WA Forest Alliance, fresh from its successes with the overall sector of looking to hold native forest logging in our beautiful native forests, are turning their attention and providing resources to those local groups here in Jarrahdale, but also in Dwellingup, to tackle this problem. And in some respects, it's a David and Goliath type issue, and we've felt that for many decades. A more modern, contemporary illustration would be it's equivalent to the Ukrainians fighting the Russians. And so perhaps see it in that way, that as individuals can make a difference. Of course, in our sector, it's non-violent, and it's through the winning of public awareness and approval and for a change to happen in our society.